presentation. Sierra Staley, our program officer, will talk about In Youth We Trust, our youth philanthropy program, as well as some opportunities to get involved with us as a volunteer. All right, so a few notes about how this Zoom session is going to work. To keep everything moving, we're muting all of our participants while we're presenting. Between each presenter, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. So you can just wave at us using the reactions button at the bottom of the screen, and we will unmute you. You can also use the chat function to ask questions at any time throughout the presentation. And Jennifer Smith, our engagement director, will be monitoring that chat box, and so she'll let us know if we need to stop and answer questions. If you have any trouble, first try turning off your video. We would love to see your lovely faces, but sometimes that causes problems. So feel free to turn your video off if that's part of the issue. And you can always reach out to Jen privately through the chat for tech support as well. We did discover, which is something that probably isn't a surprise to most people, but if you go up to the top of your screen and click view options, there's an option to hide the video panel. So if you're having trouble seeing the full shared screen, because we will be sharing our PowerPoint throughout the presentation, you can hide that video panel so it doesn't block your view. All right, we also have time blocked out at the end for questions, and you can always contact James directly if you have anything specific to your application or project that you want to ask. Of course, Sierra and I are more than happy to answer any questions, but James really is the go-to person for community grants. Normally we say just pick up the phone because we don't want you to struggle, but for right now, email actually is best. We are splitting time between various locations, and we don't always get our voicemails right away. Our IT is working on it right now, in fact, but right now there's about a 24-hour lag between when you leave a voicemail and when we get it in our email. So for now, just shoot us an email if you have any questions. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. All right. So what everybody wants to know. There won't be any significant changes to our process this year. Other than our fancy new software, which we're very excited about. There will be no criteria changes, no changes in requirements, and only one new question. This is the exact same funding you've been applying for all along, and we're looking to support the same kinds of projects, programs, and events that we have in the past. A lot of funders have shifted their resources to community programs to emergency programs this year, which is super necessary and very needed, but that didn't eliminate the need for your regular funding for your regular programming. We purposefully preserved 90% of our unrestricted grant-making dollars for community grants to preserve our program, and mostly used other sources like our community opportunities and our natural disaster endowments, as well as leveraging our outside dollars through the Illinois COVID relief and the Arts for Illinois Relief Funds. That's what we were able to use for our emergency response work through the 815 community response team and other local funders. That being said, we do understand that the context in which we're making these grants has changed. That's why our new question is, how has the COVID-19 crisis impacted your organization? We want our reviewers to fully understand the circumstances that you're working with and the depth of the impact it's had on your operations. We at the foundation have taken some steps to provide some guidance and education to our advisors ourselves, but no one can tell your story as well as you can. This isn't a scenario where having lost the most will get you the biggest grant, but it is an opportunity to explain why your operations have changed or your metrics are less ambitious. We also expect that your requests will look a little bit different, especially in the budgets. The cost of business has increased, and that should be reflected in your requests for salaries and equipment. If you need PPE or remote technology to run a program, please ask for it and take advantage of the budget narrative section to explain those costs. I also want to remind everyone that we will fund an additional 15% of the amount needed to implement the grant in indirect costs. So if you need $10,000 for an event, add $1,500 as a separate line item in your budget and increase the total request amount to $11,500. We know we can't make you whole, but we want to support you in any way we can as we navigate this new reality, and hopefully the indirect costs will at least help us start to get there. All right, so before we dig into the nitty-gritty, I want to highlight last year's community grant cycle. And Jen, if you don't mind popping over to the next slide, pretty please, thank you. So as you all are aware, we make awards in 6 different focus areas: arts and humanities, health, human services, sustainable communities, youth and family, and education. 50% of our grant making dollars are committed to Education Works, our strategic grant making initiative, which seeks to improve the educational and career opportunities for all of our students. In the 2019 community grant cycle, we awarded more than $1.4 million to 68 new projects and 6 multi-year grants throughout Northern Illinois. There were nearly $4 requested for every one we had available to award, and we do expect it to be similar this year. So you can see the breakdown on your screen here. All right, and then on the next slide, as well as in the chat, you'll see a link to our grant guidelines. This is the one-stop shop for everything related to the grant cycle. On the right-hand side, you'll see a box labeled FY20 by the numbers, so fiscal year 20. This breaks down the number and size of grants in each focus area for the last cycle. There is no limit to the amount that you can apply for. We don't want to inadvertently stifle a great idea before it can get off the ground. But it does give you an idea of what has been awarded in the past, including the average grant amount and the range of awards for each focus area. The overall average grant amount last year was $19,760, and the amount available for each focus area will be approximately the same this year. In addition to the grant guidelines, you can find last year's grant report with details on each award at cfnil.org/community, which has also been dropped into the chat. All right, next slide. All right, so you can see here are listed all the donors for the Community Grants Program. The next one, please. All right, so you can see here, several of these donors established funds with a specific purpose years ago that were consolidated into the Community Grants Program. So the United Cerebral Palsy of Black Hawk Region set aside dollars for organizations providing services to persons with disabilities, especially for activities that promote inclusion. The John W. Lundeen Historic Preservation Fund seeks to celebrate the region's history and preserve historical integrity. And the Margaret K. Aldine Christian Ministry Fund funds programs that meet the food, housing, and medical needs of the poor, primarily through organizations with a Christian emphasis. The criteria for these funds is baked into the individual focus areas, so you don't need to do anything differently when completing your application. It's just the same application, same focus areas. But we do want you to be aware that these funds exist, and our reviewers look specifically for projects that fulfill their intentions. Because these and all of our donors chose to endow their funds, their legacy will allow us to invest in Northern Illinois community for years to come. All right. Any questions before we move on? Alrighty, so now I'd like to introduce Dan Ross, CFNIL's new president.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Dan. I am the very new president of the Community Foundation, joined back on July 1. And I personally want to welcome you all to our Grantseekers Information Meeting this morning, and also to thank you again for your flexibility in allowing us to hold these meetings virtually. I cannot wait for the opportunity to get to be face-to-face with as many of you as possible in the future, but I'm certainly thankful for this technology so we can continue to do our important work during these strange times. As I mentioned, these are unprecedented times, and I cannot imagine the struggles that many of you are facing in your organizations right now. But I am truly grateful for the important work that you have continued to do despite the challenging environment. On behalf of our team, our board of trustees, and generations of donors, we are very thankful for the opportunity to partner with you. Thank you again for your time this morning, and don't ever hesitate to reach out to me directly. My email address is on your screen. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I would love to get to know more about you and your organization, what you do. So please reach out if you can. And with that, I'll turn it back to Sarah.
All right, and I will turn it over to Sierra Staley. She's our program officer who oversees our In Youth We Trust program.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Sierra Staley. I'm the program officer at the Community Foundation, as well as the In Youth We Trust staff liaison. For those of you that don't know about In Youth We Trust, I hope after this, you'll be able to sing it from the rooftops with people that you know from your organization or your personal circles. So In Youth We Trust is the Community Foundation's youth philanthropy program for high school students in our 4-county area. This program focuses on grant making, volunteerism, and leadership skills that equip our students to enact positive change for our future. The grant process, I like to call it our mini community grants program because that's kind of how it's mirrored. They have up to $25,000 every year to award to local youth organizations in our area for their community projects. Last year was a very special year for Youth We Trust. Not only did they celebrate 25 years of existence, but they also reached $500,000 in total giving. And the kids were very excited about that, and you can bet that they really marketed that. So if you have any youth volunteers or know of any youth that are really passionate about your cause at your organization, this is a really great way to get them engaged into a specific project and help guide them through the process. And not to mention, you all just have a wealth of knowledge about grant writing and how to manage a grant, which is really important. I never learned that in school, and that's something I would have found invaluable. So being able to pass that knowledge on to the next generation is a beautiful thing. So if you know of any youth-led projects in your community that could benefit from this resource, please let me know. My email is on your screen, as well as our website, and my contact information is posted all over that. But just to give you a quick example of a project that we funded last year that I really loved, we had one that was from the Youth Services Network. They work with kids called the Parenthood Scholars Program. And what they did, the kids saw a really big need in their schools, especially with the homeless population, that they didn't necessarily have the hygiene products that they needed. So what they did is they started a hygiene drive. So they were able to write that grant, market it, and also facilitate that grant last year. And I thought that was a really beautiful way that the kids really have their hand on the pulse of their peers. So I thought that was really wonderful, and I wanted to share that with you. But a unique thing about this year, in conjunction with our regular grant cycle for youth-led projects, the council wants to broaden its grant-making scope. So this year, in Youth We Trust will offer a grant cycle specifically for nonprofits that serve youth directly, and these can be adult written. We don't have all the details yet, but the application will be open from November 10th to January 5th. And the total amount awarded will be from $15,000 to $20,000. But once we get a little closer to that date, you can expect an email from me telling you a little bit more about that, and also the grant guidelines will be provided. So if you know any high school students that would be interested in joining this outstanding group of young people on the Youth We Trust Council, please send them my way. Please send me an email. Please send me their contact information so I can reach out to them. This year will be virtual, so we would love to have more students from all over the Ford County area. And I think this would really help for those that have to drive quite a bit of ways to our office. So that way it can make our meetings a little bit more accessible. The application to become a member will be live on our website by the end of this week. So please take a look for that. And our kickoff meeting is going to be on September 19th at 9 a.m. So please encourage all high school students that you know that are interested to join our virtual meeting and to find out a little bit more about Youth We Trust. And again, if you have any questions about the program, please email me. Thank you.
Thanks, Sierra. Anybody have any questions before we dig into the real meat of the presentation? Thoughts, questions, concerns? Okay, then I will hand it over to James Patterson, our program director, to talk about how to actually apply for these funds this year. You're muted, James.
Wasted a perfectly good joke. It won't be the same. It won't be the same if I repeat it. So anyway, thank you, Sarah. Happy to be here, of course, and glad to have an opportunity to meet with all of you, if only virtually. We do enjoy our interactions with our community of nonprofit organizations that are helping us and us working together, partnering to do some good in our community. So anyway, I'm going to talk a bit about our community grants program. And that is, of course, why you're here for the most part. And the first thing I would say, as Sarah mentioned, the first stop for you is to go to our website and look at the Community Grants webpage. On that page, you'll have all the details that you need to know, all the specifications, criteria, what we won't fund, what we will fund, all of that sort of thing, and process and procedure. I'm going to go over several things today in this presentation. but I'm not going to get into all the real nitty gritty. So that is your place to go, and always encourage people to stop there first. It'll answer many, many of the questions that you have. I also want to point out that on our website, we have a grant resources webpage. On that page, there's many resources that can be very helpful to you, but I'm going to go through just a couple here on the next slide. A really helpful document that's on there is the sample budget spreadsheet and narrative. We do ask for you to upload a budget template for your charitable activity, your request, and also complete a narrative about that budget. Great thing about this particular document is it really sort of gives you a great example in detail of what it really should look like. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at that before they complete their budget template. There's a document there called Working with PDFs, and many of the attachments need to be in PDF form sometimes, and they have file limitations oftentimes. This document will walk you through how to reduce file size, how to combine PDFs, how to create them to begin with, free software you can use to do that, and so on. So a great resource. Another set of documents that are an example of what we're looking for particular parts of the application are the examples of the evaluation plans and the result statements that would go in the measuring results section of the website, or of the new application. And again, it's much like the other samples for the budget in that it really lays it out in detail, examples of what you might put in there. And it has different scenarios that might make more sense. There might be different types of requests, or multi-year requests, post single-year requests, and so on. So good resource there. Sarah already mentioned the grant report that's posted there. I would definitely look through that. And a really helpful piece. Sorry, I have a loose dog. Loose dog. I'll be right back. Sorry.
About that, James has 4 tiny dogs, and they really, really like their dad. So make a run for it when they can.
The feeling is mutual. That was Ella, so everyone knows. All right, so back to, nothing can be more exciting than a dog, but I'll try. I'll do the best I can here. With the proposal review guidelines, the great thing with this is it's really a sneak peek into what our committees use to make to drive their selection. It has all the questions they think through. What are the aspects of the application that are important? So if you want a sneak peek and an inside track, so to speak, I would take a look at the proposal review guidelines for sure. And then of course, we're going to post this PowerPoint and the presentation on our website when we're done. So we'll go to the next slide and talk a little bit about eligibility. First of all, organizations must be either a 501c3 nonprofit, a religious organization, a unit of government, or a public university or college or school in order to receive grants from the Community Foundation. And you also need to be in existence serving the public for at least a year. And as it relates to a 501c3 organization, we gauge that by the date of your IRS determination letter. So as long as when we award the grants in December, you would have been, whether a year has elapsed since that date on your IRS determination letter, then you're eligible. So that's an important thing to note. We also only fund charitable activities that are geared toward the majority, well, let me say that again, that the majority of the folks that you're being served for those charitable activities are from Boone, Ogle, Stevenson, and Winnebago County. That doesn't mean you or your organization has to reside there, but the folks being served have to. Okay, and then also we will not make grants for religious purposes, although obviously we will make grants to faith-based organizations, do all the time. And the the Christian Ministry Fund that was mentioned earlier is another example of that, but we do it broader than just that one particular fund. So we'll take a look at the next slide on that talks about another really key eligibility requirement, and that is being current on your reporting with the Community Foundation. So normally, what I would encourage you to do at this point is if you have an open grant with us and you've already completed it and you have the results that you need to complete your final report, I would ordinarily say, please go do that. That's the best way to be up to date. I'm not saying that today because what we'd like to do is have all of you complete that final report in our new system. But the system is a rather elaborate affair, so we're implementing in stages, and we haven't gotten to the stage of the final report piece yet. So we would ask you to hold off on that. But what I would ask you to do is, if you have an open grant with the Community Foundation, to complete an interim report. And you can find the instructions for that interim report on our website, on the grants resources page, in the final progress and interim reports section. And ordinarily, it's just a very short email even. It doesn't, email's fine. You don't need to send in a document or via post or anything like that. So, so we are asking you to hold off on completing your final report in the old system. Don't do it there. Please wait until we announce that we're ready with the new system. So I'll go to the next slide here and talk about the timeline for our grant cycle. First, I'm just going to say that everybody will need to register on the portal, the new portal, to do this. And the application is actually open right now as we speak, and it will be open until September 21st before 5 p.m. So, and then as I mentioned earlier, the awards would be in late December. And I want to talk a little bit about the process that we use to make these selections. It's a difficult and challenging process because there are many excellent organizations that deserve funding. There are many great charitable activities that can really make a difference that deserve funding. And unfortunately, there are not nearly enough resources to fulfill all of those needs. So it's a very competitive process. Last grant cycle, we received 147 applications totaling over 3 million. And out of that, we were able to fund 68 awards for just a shade over $1 million. So as Sarah had mentioned earlier, there is a lot that gets cut. And as I was saying, there's a lot of really good stuff that gets cut. That's one of the big challenges. So, but to help us with that process, we have a committee review process. There are 7 committees, actually 8 committees, that we work with to review these applications, many of them reviewing between 20 and 30 applications from our nonprofit organizations. And those folks oftentimes have expertise in that area or have a community vantage point to be able to help make those decisions. And they are the ones who do make those decisions. Staff does not weigh in or we don't get a vote. It's just the committees that do that. But once the committees have made their recommendations after careful thought and review, we will send those to the board for a final approval. So with a competitive process, I'm going to go to the next slide. With a competitive process, you really need to be sure, and we really work hard to make sure that we have a fair and objective review process. As I mentioned before, we have committees that review the applications, and all but 2 of those folks are from the community at large. 2 of them are trustees, but the rest of the folks are from the community at large and representing various segments of the community. We also have a very stringent, robust conflict of interest policy. The primary thing that we do there is many of these folks, as you know, are going to, on these committees, are going to be involved in the community. But if they serve as a board member or have some sort of fiduciary responsibility with an organization, they will not be able to participate in discussions that involve that organization. So at that point, they have to actually leave the room, and we have the conversation without them. And they're informed of the decision after they return to the room. So the fix is never in, so to speak, on as far as that goes. We also try to make sure that our committee members are anonymous to avoid any sort of lobbying from friends and folks that would like to sort of get a leg up in the selection process. Everything we can do to make it fair and objective. And another thing that we do for that purpose is we have sort of a blackout period from the time the application opens until the time the application closes, where we will not sit down and meet with our nonprofit organizations who may be applying. And the idea is just so that no organization gets a unfair advantage by that communication. Having said that, we are happy to answer questions via email primarily at this point, or perhaps phone if that's necessary. Most of those questions really relate to the process of applying, and so we certainly want to help you navigate the software and so on. So on to the next exciting slide. Very excited. See how excited they are about this slide? You can just tell they're very excited. So that's because we have a new application portal. And we're convinced that you're going to be excited about it too once you have a chance to use it, because we really believe it's much, much easier to use, much more user-friendly, even looks nicer. We know this because we've been implementing it, and the great thing about it is that the company, they provide training videos for us and walk us through a lot of that. And so we're able to see just how intuitive it is on the back end. And so we know that it's just as intuitive on the front end. And so we think you're really gonna like it. We're gonna take a look at some of the aspects of it. The first thing to say is everybody needs to do a new registration. The registrations in the old system are not going to transfer over to the new system. You have to start afresh. And we want you to stop using Spectrum. Spectrum is the old system. I say stop using it. I don't want you to input any data into it because it will not transfer over at this point. It's still, to my knowledge, it's still up and running. So if you wanted to go into your account and download some of your applications at this point, you could still do that. That would be fine. Just don't want you to put anything new in there because it will not transfer over and it'll be lost for us.
And also, we have no idea how long it's going to be up. Technically, our contract already ended, so it could go down today as far as we're aware. So get in there now if you want to get anything out rather than later.
Absolutely. Good point. So you're looking at our webpage right now. At the top of every page on our website are the buttons that you see in the upper right-hand corner there. And the one that we're interested in is the Apply for a Grant button. If you click on that button, it will take you to the next slide. That one. It'll take you to this slide, which is a login page, and also where you can create that new account that we're asking you to create. So remember, every organization needs to create a new account. But what we are also saying is that initially have just one person do that. Create their account. There is a tool that they can use to invite other folks from the organization to also register and then be connected to that organization. So remember, one person first, and I'll talk about that tool shortly. One thing to keep in mind with your email address when you're setting up your account and when you're logging in is that the email address field is case sensitive, which is unusual for email addresses. That's not typical at all, but it's looking at it as a username, not so much as an email address. It does use the email for sending messages and so on, but for the login purposes, it's really just a username. So it's important to type it exactly the same way when you register and when you then go in to log in, otherwise it won't let you in. So that's important. Well, you can see the button there to create the new account. That's what you would click to do that. And we are asking you all to do that sooner than later. That way you have a chance to get in there, sort of get used to the site, get used to the feel of it. You can actually take a look at the application. You can start an application, save it, and come back to it later. You know, once you have more information, and that sort of thing. So we'll go to the next slide and take a look at the registration page. So as you can see here, we've got the registration, including the organization's information. That's the first thing you'll be presented with. And so this is why it's really important for one person to start out, because if you do them simultaneously, for an example, then you're going to have two of your organizations in the system, and they'll have to be merged. So we want to start with just one organization and connect everyone else to it as we go. It's also really important to get your organizational information correct the first time, because you will not be able to go in and change that information. You'll have to email us and ask us to do that. So just something to keep in mind there. We'll go to the next slide, which is a check slide for me to make sure that I have told you everything that I'm supposed to tell you. And also so you have a record of what I babbled about during the presentation itself. And I think I did get all that. So we'll go on to some new features that this particular web application features that the other one did not. Well, one of those features is the applicant dashboard. So it's sort of the first, once you log in, this is what you're going to see. And it allows you to apply. It allows you to have access to your active requests on the one tab there, and be able to see historical requests on the other tab. Now, right away, the historical request tab is going to be blank for you. As you complete applications and submit applications in the new portal, they will start to show in there. We have high hopes, but no guarantee, that some of the old application information from the past portal we may get to be able to show here, but we don't know that for sure. So yeah, so we'll go to the next slide and take a look at the a few other things that I think are really helpful. I mentioned the tutorials and the videos and things that they use for training us as staff. Well, they have a bunch of them for you folks as users of the application. So if you look at the big circle there, there's a link to an instructional video for applying for funding. And a nice thing is about these videos are really pretty short. I mean, just a couple of minutes or so, succinct, but right to the point and really walk you through it. And then they have written tutorials as well that you can access. And we have these scattered throughout the portal, either in the applicant dashboard or in the application itself. So very helpful. And let's see, if you look at, well, I don't know, maybe the most exciting thing is that it actually auto saves. So you don't have to worry about losing information. I know that has been a problem in some cases with the old system. It seems like a simple sort of thing, right? But apparently it wasn't so simple for the past software developers. So that's a good thing. If you look on the right there, you can see the apply button, the blue apply button. That's how you actually access the application. If that blue button is not there and you just see the rest of it, then that means it's not open and available. But one of the nice things about the button on the left-hand side of that rectangle is it's a preview feature. You can, whether the application is open or not, you can click on that preview button and it will pull up the fields that are going to be on the application. And the great thing about it is that as you put in certain information into certain fields, it will reveal sections that are specific to that criteria. So for an example, if you have a support type of capital commodity, it will give you a different field for the measuring results section than if it was a program. And there's some other things too. There's the other fields that would be important are the size of the request, whether it's a multi-year or not. That will cause different sections to be revealed or not revealed to tailor the application to you. But the great thing about the preview function is that you can go in and add in those answers to those fields, and you can see exactly what questions you're going to need to answer. So that's a good feature. And we'll move on to the next slide, which is simply another check screen here. And I did cover all that. So we'll go to the next slide because we have even more new features. So if you look at the top, we have some blue buttons along the top right corner. I think you're really, really going to like the copy previous answers button. So you may be aware that you can apply for multiple grants during one grant cycle. Once you've submitted one, you can open another application and click the copy previous answers, and it will import the answers from the previous application. It's really helpful for your information that repeats, like the organizational information as an example. There may be some other things that repeat. And you do have the opportunity also, by the way, to edit any of that gets imported in. But you're also going to find that if you are one that tends to apply for the same program in multiple years or consecutive years, that you'll be able to click that button and it'll pull in the information from last year's charitable activity. And you'll be able to, edit, spruce it up if you'd like. But a lot of the content's probably pretty similar, and it'll make that process a whole lot easier, we hope. The button on the far right there, the collaborate button, is what I mentioned before. After you have your initial registration, you'll use this collaborate button to then invite other people from your organization to collaborate on that particular application, but also just to be part of the organization in case they, may want to, or maybe they would be completing an application down the road too. So that's how you get people to be connected to your organization's web account. So that's an important feature. And by the way, on the previous slide, not that we need to go back there necessarily, but there are 2 tutorials having to do with how to use that collaborate feature. They'll walk you right through it. In the middle of the screen, you see a big red circle that shows the applicant contact information and the organization information. That comes directly from the account. You don't have to type that in. It's going to be there anyway. So I think that's helpful. And then you can see the question list button there in the lower right. And that will pull up a list of every single potential question. And you can print that out as PDF. The other one, by the way, the preview, you can print that out as PDF too, in case you want to sit down with a group and kind of look at the questions and brainstorm about how you might want to answer them. So we'll go to the next screen and take a look at even more features. So if you recall from the previous grant application, I think we had like 5 upload fields where you could add photos that help demonstrate the value of your charitable activity. And so you had to do each one of those separately. And they each had, file restrictions and size restrictions and so on. Well, this application actually uses Dropbox to collect photos from you. And the great thing about it is that you can actually, there's a couple of great things really. The one is that it's you can upload 10 documents, or I should say pictures. But not only that, you can do it all at once by simply dragging and dropping into the Dropbox. So what you would do is just click on that middle link there where it says click this link to access our Dropbox. But prior to that, I should tell you that you need to follow a naming convention for the files that you're going to drop in there so that we know who they apply to. So as you can see, it would be organization, project title, photo number. And another important thing to keep in mind is that if you don't want us to use those photos for publicity and so on, because we like to support and promote the good work that you're doing in the community, oftentimes through social media and so on. And nothing really conveys like pictures and photos do. So if you don't want to share that, perhaps for confidentiality reasons or any other reason really, you have absolute control over that by simply typing "do not use" at the end of the file name, and then we'll know that we're not to use that file. We'll go to the next screen and we'll actually take a look at the Dropbox screen that you go to. So you would, this would come up and you would click the button to add files, And this, well, actually, you don't have to click the button add files. You literally can drag and drop them from your folders on your computer right into the middle of the screen, and it will put them in there. And you can see how the naming convention came out there. So one has the do not use on it, and they're just, but that way we'll know that they all belong to Caravan. And with the project title, we know which project in case you did apply twice. It's conceivable that you could do that. So we think that's an advancement, and we're going to move on to the next screen and make sure that I've talked about everything I'm supposed to talk about. I guess after 4 tries, we're getting pretty good. Got most of it covered here. And we'll go to the next screen to talk about how we've been able to do some streamlining with the application. So, and many of these screenshots are directly from the application. So, and then this is an example of that. You recall, if you've applied before, that in the past we've asked for fairly detailed demographic information projections on the front end for ethnicity and race, and for gender, and for age, and so on. We've eliminated most of that. The only thing we've kept is the residency. You know, which counties do they reside in? And the reason we do that is because, as I mentioned in the front end of this, it's an important piece of eligibility. You need to be serving folks, the majority of folks that live in our service area. So that's the reason that's still there. But down below that, you have the opportunity to have a lot more latitude in describing your population in that larger text field there. And it allows you to add things that, you know, we weren't really asking for before, specifically. For an example, socioeconomic status, which is oftentimes a key component in the population that you're serving. But it gives you more latitude to do that. We know that we had heard from many people that it was very difficult to make that projection that early on in the process. Now, I should tell you that when we do the final reporting, we will ask you to give more accurate numbers after you've been able to track it and find out, you know, who you were serving. And the whole point of that is to make sure that we're serving the broader community. It's the reason why we track that information. So we'll move on to the next slide, which will show another streamlining attempt, and it has to do with the financial information. We used to ask for about 15 data points from your 990s, and you would have to add those in. We got a lot of questions about, well, where do I find it? And, you know, I'm not sure what to put here, I'm not sure what to put there, and so on. So we have eliminated that, and we're going to do some number crunching on our side of things directly from your financials to share with our committee. So in the case of organizations that, or I'm sorry, for requests 30,000 and less, we would be asking for your 2 most recent completed 990s. That'll give us 3 years worth of financial data. And for those requests that are over 30,000 or multi-year, we'll be asking for 2 most recently completed audited financials. And again, that'll give us 3 years. So we'll take all that information and we will crunch it behind the scenes. And you know what? I'm gonna not go on to the next slide just yet, because I'm gonna mention one other feature that someone just told me about the new registration process and application that is a nice thing to know, and it kind of relates to application streamlining. I heard that they really like that it looks cleaner, the application looks cleaner, and that it's all on one page. So you don't have to switch between tabs like in the previous application. So, but as I was mentioning before, we'll put those numbers and things together and give that to our committees, so our committees can review that information. And now for a quick commercial announcement.
All right, sorry to interrupt your local broadcasting, but just had a question for y'all. Do you all kind of stay awake at night trying to think about how you can volunteer with the Community Foundation? Well, I have an answer for you. You could be a community scholarship advisor for the Community Foundation. Just a quick little tip about, or just a fun fact about the Community Foundation, we're actually the largest provider of private scholarships in Northern Illinois. Last year, we received about 1,313 applications. And we couldn't review all of those without our amazing scholarship advisors. We have about 120, but we're always looking for more. One thing we were very excited about last year, we were able to award a little over $300,000 to over 150 students in our community, which we were very excited about. So if you wanted to get involved with the Community Foundation as a scholarship advisor, the process is pretty easy. When you are a scholarship advisor, you recommend recipients for scholarship funds by reviewing and scoring the applications based on the donor intent of the scholarship. Advisors typically spend between 15 and 20 hours reviewing and scoring those applications, but it's all done at home. It's not like you have to come in to do it. So if you wanted to get involved, you would just attend our advisor recruitment meeting, which is coming up on September 8th from 4 to 5, which will be on Zoom. And you'll learn a little bit about the scholarship process and also just CFNIL in general. And then you would review and score a batch of applications online. And then you would also attend just one, hopefully, in-person meeting to decide on who the recipients will be. It might be hybrid or it might be all on Zoom like we had to do last year. But you'll be discussing your scores with a small committee and then make a recommendation to our board of trustees. So if you're interested in this, please let me know. You can send me an email or you can drop me a private chat on here. Please let me know. We get very excited about scholarships. We have a lot of people from nonprofit organizations that come and volunteer with us for this. We have one volunteer in particular that says, my faith in humanity is restored every single year after reading these applications, because these kids that we have in our community are absolutely amazing. So if this is something you're interested in, please let me know. On to James.
Back to our regularly scheduled programming. We'll jump right into application tips, which I'm sure you've all been sitting with, waiting with bated breath for. So our application tips here that we have for you is, number one, with this system, please begin the application in the user account of the primary contact. Because as I mentioned before, it automatically pulls that in from that user account. So we want to know who to contact if we have questions about that request. So, but once you've started it in that account, others can collaborate if you've invited them to collaborate. Of course, all applications must be submitted online, as that has been the case for many years now. And if you are applying for currently funded programs, sometimes people ask, well, can I apply if I'm currently being funded for another program or the same program? The answer is yes, you can. What you need to do, though, is, as I mentioned before, create an interim report and get that to us before before the deadline for the grant application. And an important point here, too, if you are being funded for the same, or if you're asking for funding for the same program that you're currently being funded for, it would be in your best interest to do a more robust interim report than is what is actually required, because the committees look at those reports and they look at past final reports, actually, if it's for a program that they've already funded in the past. And we've had several occasions where the current request was actually approved based on the strength of the reporting. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. But yes, absolutely, you can apply if you're currently being funded. We get a lot of questions about the focus area and which one should you choose. And sometimes you have a charitable activity that sort of straddles a couple of different focus areas. That's not uncommon at all. So what we ask you to do is mostly to take a look at your measuring results section, look at the goals that you've set for yourself. Are they primarily for one focus area or primarily for a different focus area? So a good example of that might be education and youth and families. There's could be a lot of overlap there. So are the goals more really related to the educational development, or are they more related to character and youth development, as an example? So you would choose that way. But at the end of the day, regardless of what you choose, it's not necessarily a done deal. If we look at it and we see the request will have a more competitive chance in a different focus area, we will move it there. If we think will be more competitive in that particular area or better fit, we're going to do that. So all is not lost if you choose a focus area that we wouldn't have decided to choose. So no need to stress. I did mention before that many of the attachments have, well, pretty much all the attachments have restrictions. So they typically are a particular file type, and typically there is a file maximum size. So that's spelled out in the application. So please pay attention to that, because we do get questions of why something's not uploading properly. Typically, it's because of those restrictions. So we'll move on to the next slide, which has a few more tips in it. I had mentioned that you can apply for multiple charitable activities during the same grant cycle. We have a 3 application limit, 3 unique applications. So you can't, by unique, what we mean is that you can't take the same application and submit it to one focus area and then take the same application and submit it to a different focus area. They have to actually be different applications, unique applications. And it's important to note also that if you have, your main organization, and then say you have a foundation that does nothing but support your main organization, yet they're separate entities technically, that still, to us, for this purpose, counts as one entity. So you don't get, 6 bites at the apple rather than the 3 bites at the apple is kind of the idea there. So, and I mentioned the interim report a couple of times so far. There is a special field at the front of the application to upload that. You can also just email it to me. Either way is fine, but for your convenience, there is a field to upload that so that you can meet that requirement at the same time. We'll move to the next slide. So last year, we introduced a new support type. For many, many years, we've had the program or project or event support types. And the practical piece with the different support type is that it reveals sections on the application that are more appropriate for that particular support type. Well, last year, we added the capital commodity. It says proposal type, but I need to change that to support type because that's the new language we're using. So anyway, with this particular one, it's specific to what we're calling capital or commodity types of requests. And to explain, a capital request, first of all, what it's not for general support for capital campaigns. We're not funding campaigns, and by a campaign, we're defining that as, like an overall large project that we're giving a relatively insignificant portion to. So if you have a $3 million building project and you want $20,000 from us just to generally support it, we don't do that kind of funding. We're going to be more, we want ours to be a little bit more targeted. We will, however, do a portion of that overall building. Let's say you need furniture and equipment for a particular room within that facility. We would be willing to do that, perhaps. So we just want it to be more specific. But the other types of capital purchases that we're talking about are like equipment purchases or a smaller remodeling project or, perhaps a van to transport clients or these kinds of things that more or less there's no program really around it per se. You just need this particular item to be able to serve your clients better. So let's go to the next slide and talk about what we mean by commodity. By a commodity, we really mean the purchase of consumable items, oftentimes in bulk. So it might be for food for a pantry, for an example. There's not a big program around it. You're just securing food and then distributing that so that folks have good nutrition. And so this, what happens is that it allows us to populate your application with more relevant questions that make more sense for this type of a request. So this might be for the purchases, well, I said food, but perhaps like backpacks that are being distributed to kids, or maybe it's clothing that's being distributed to people that are in need of it. But an important distinction, though, is if the supplies or whatever you're asking for for us to fund the items if it's really in support of an actual program that has outcomes and goals and things like that that are more than just we are providing people with a particular item. Then it would not be capital commodity. It would be either program, project, or event, right? And here again, this is a situation where if you're not sure which one, give me an email. I most likely will be able to tell you right away which would be better for you. So, and I should tell you also that with the capital commodity support type, they are not eligible for multi-year grants. So we'll move to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about the budget as soon as I take a drink. Thank you all for indulging that. So budget tips. We oftentimes get questions about the budget. And so I wanted to give you a few little tips here. One of the things that comes up from time to time is that you can only enter or make entries into the blue cells on this template that you download. Only the blue cells. All the white cells, any other color cell, actually, you cannot type anything. And when you do, it'll give you a message, and then you'll feel like it's copyright or that it's password protected. I think it comes up as a password error, if I'm thinking correctly. But in any case, it can be confusing at that point, and then you think it's not working. So, but just be sure only to use the blue fields for your data entry. Another key point is to make sure that the total revenue either equals or exceeds the total expenses on your budget sheet. We want to make sure that you have a plan for how you're going to secure all of the funding for all the expenses that you have. So when would it ever exceed? Well, it would exceed if you don't know that you're receiving all the funding. Oftentimes you might have 3 or 4 grant requests out there to help fund it. And if they're just, if you've just requested and you don't know the outcome, then it's naturally going to be more than the expenses that you have listed there. We'll go to the next slide and talk about a few other things with budgets. So you will need to save your PDF to upload it, or I'm sorry, save your template as a PDF to upload it. You can't upload it as Excel. That way we can't monkey with it, right? It will be protected and as you intended it. And oftentimes, if you look at the expense side of the equation here, you've got 10 lines that you could use. Well, oftentimes you're going to have more than just 10 expenses. So you certainly can group expenses. Typically, they're like items that you would put in there, but you would want to explain in your budget narrative how you decided to do that. So just so that we understand what is encompassed in that one line item. So that is something that I would pay attention to. And we also have to have for years, oh yes, we have to make sure I got everything on there. I did. Onward we tread. So for many years, when we have an expense that's over $5,000, we have asked you to provide 2 quotes. We've tried to this year clarify what exactly requires 2 quotes. So we are asking for 2 quotes if any of the following exceed $5,000. That would be remodeling projects, facility rental, consultant fees, capital projects, equipment purchases, or contracted services. So like with a remodeling project, for an example, each sheet of plywood doesn't cost over $5,000. But if you take a look at the whole project, and it is over $5,000, we'd like to see that you looked at a couple of resources for getting that done. So we do ask for 2 quotes in those situations. We also ask for it when, like in a commodity request, for an example, when a quantity of the same item or similar items comes up to over 5,000. So like 50 Chromebooks for kids, for an example, or 200 backpacks might come up over 5,000. Well, we want to see what that breakdown is of the various pieces that would make that up. We do have a few exceptions. We do not ask for quotes whenever you have the internal staffing, or well, when it's your internal staffing costs, you know how much you're paying your folks. So that's fine. And there are situations where quotes are either impossible to get or impractical to get. So there might be an item that you need that there's basically only one manufacturer, or there's only one that produces it the way that you need to get it. So there are those situations. You would just need to explain that in your budget narrative. And then oftentimes there's a situation where you have a partnership developed with a particular vendor that gives you a greatly discounted price or a cost. And we don't think it's necessary for you to go bother some other contractor to get another quote, have them waste their time, have you waste your time, when everybody knows that we're going with contractor B who has been in service to your organization for years. So, I mean, perhaps it's a board member or something. So in those cases, we would not expect 2 quotes, but we would expect a letter from that partner vendor that explains that they are giving you a really good deal. So another thing I want to point out about this particular page, this is actually part of the application again. One of the things that's great about the application is there's many more opportunities for us to build instructions right into the application. So you don't have to reference any documents that we posted on our website or any web pages necessarily to get this information. A lot of it is baked right into the application, which I find really helpful. Okay, so.
Well, before we move on, because
yes.
you know I always have thoughts on quotes. This is kind of
Yes.
a bugaboo for me. Quotes is one area where you can't include too many. So even if you're underneath the $5,000 threshold, providing quotes or even a screenshot of what you're purchasing online or something like that to verify and justify the expense is really helpful for us. We know that sometimes the things that you need are maybe more expensive than what we think they should be, but have no justification for that. So give us that justification for why you're purchasing something. There was a very long conversation last year about the cost of garbage cans. Like, just give us two ideas of what these garbage cans cost, and we can move on from that conversation. So, you know, if you are in fact doing some sort of price comparison, just show us your work. It makes us a lot easier to have those conversations about, are we spending our dollars responsibly? So when in doubt, send us those quotes.
Yeah, and I should also tell you that you don't necessarily have to go with the lowest quote either. There are times when there's a reason why the more expensive quote makes more sense. Perhaps the quality is going to be better. Perhaps they're providing additional services that the other one wasn't going to provide. But there can be reasons. Again, the key is just communicate with us. So put that in the budget narrative so that we'll understand why that is. It's amazing when the committees review these applications, they have all these questions that they come up with, but if you've answered those questions for them, it's like, oh, well, that makes sense, you know, and on they go to the next aspect. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll go on to the next aspect. We are going to talk a little bit about indirect expenses, and Sarah has already talked about this. And we basically have left it in here twice because we really want to make sure that you are including 15% for indirect costs in your proposals. So we will fund up to 15% of the amount that you're requesting from the Community Foundation that's needed to implement the proposal. So if it's going to cost you $10,000 to implement that program, add another $1,500 so that you're actually asking for $11,500. Does that make sense? I say that right, Sarah? All right, good deal. So that's what we really want you to do. We expect to see indirect expenses on the budgets this year. And we will move on to examples now on the next slide of direct versus indirect expenses. So the key is that if that expense is directly related or needed in that charitable activity, it is a direct expense. A good example for salary, a lot of times people think of salary as always being an indirect expense or an overhead item or whatever. Overhead is an overly descriptive term. It means 3,000 things to 3,000 different people. However, with salary, the time that, let's say your executive director also teaches one of your classes, the time that that executive director is teaching that class for that program is direct. That's a direct expense. So that part of her salary or his salary is a direct expense. The time that that executive director spends managing their organization, on the other hand, is an indirect expense. So that's just one example. There's a few other examples there. And the reason we provide these examples is I think everybody looks at direct and indirect expenses just slightly differently. So you almost have to have your own definition that you share, and so you have a common language that you're working with, and that's why we're putting that in there. So on to the next slide, we're going to talk about opportunities for you to learn more about the grant application in more detail, in more practical terms, where we really look at two aspects of the application. That's the measuring results section and the budgeting section. Those are the two sections that we get the most comments and questions, and there's the most confusion. And there are also areas where you can make, I would say, more of a difference in your application in terms of improving its competitiveness. So we do offer these workshops. There's going to be 4 of them. You can see the times, and we are going to send a link to register for these. They will be held on Zoom because things aren't going to change appreciably, unfortunately, before August and September. Gosh, do we ever wish it would. But one of these days, we'll all be able to get together in person, and it'll be much better. So on to the next opportunity to learn more about the Community Foundation. And that's for those that are selected to receive a grant award. You have the opportunity to go to a Grantee Orientation. We do require any grantee that did not attend last year to attend. But if you did attend last year and you feel like you've gotten what you need to know, you do not have to attend. However, you're certainly welcome to if you'd like to get a refresher. In the Grantee Orientation, we primarily talk about how to complete your final report and how to really put together a good final report that includes all the requirements, but also shares exactly how much of a difference you have made through your charitable activity. And then also how to publicize and promote the good work that you're doing in conjunction with the Community Foundation, because we want to help you with that. Jennifer does an amazing job of getting stories out on social media and other avenues as well. So do want to invite you to that. And we're going to move to the next slide, which is for questions for us. There's been a fair amount of activity on the chat board down here. Did we get all that taken care of?
We did. The big question was about multi-year grants. So we award up to 3 years of multi-year funding in the education and health fields or focus areas. We don't do multi-year grant making in the others because what we found is that we kept overextending ourselves, and then all of a sudden 1 year we don't have enough money to spend on like that year's stuff. So so we've restricted it to those 2 areas.
Excellent.
And we will be sharing one of the recordings and these slides at the end of the week as well. So everyone will be able to access that on our website. So we've got a question about the multi-year grants. Are they approved once or annually? James, you want to take that?
Sure. They are officially approved one time. However, you do need to complete a progress report in between years of funding, and that progress report needs to show that you're making adequate progress toward the goals of your multi-year grant, and then it sort of needs to be approved at that point to be renewed. So the advantage is, however, that you do not have to reapply. You just complete your progress report, which gets us up to date on the changes that are being made and the progress that you're making. Our intent is that you would receive subsequent payments. So it would only be a situation where there is something awry that would not allow you to renew, really.
Correct. Okay.
All right, we'd love to hear from folks if they want to come off a mute and ask a question.
It's much more fun that way.
And we have already heard each other 4 times now. You're the only new participants in this session.
Hey, James, this is Rudy
Yes, hello.
Valdez.
Hey, Rudy,
Hi.
how are you?
Pretty good. Hey, I have a question. Now, if a grant submitted, and let's just say it has activities and they total up to be $10,000 as an example, but you deem, or the committee deems that, 70% of the stuff is good and it's worthy of the grant, and that totals up to be, $7,000, instead of the 10. Will the whole grant be canceled or, disqualified, or will a portion of it be granted?
That's an excellent question. That's a really good question. We will do partial funding sometimes. Our overall philosophy is we would rather fund something fully or close to fully than to give partial funding that causes the applicant to go out and scramble for additional dollars. At least that way, you know where you stand and you can decide, oh, maybe I'm not going to do the program this year just because I don't think the support is there. But we will do occasionally some lower funding if we feel, for example, the program or the charitable activity is scalable. So you might not be able to do everything you wanted to do, but you'll be able to do a certain percentage of what you wanted to do, and that certain percentage will still be, exceptionally valuable to whoever is able to be part of that. So that's sort of the way we look at that.
Yeah,
Okay, great. So that's why it's important to itemize as much as possible, right?
Absolutely. I mean, well, it helps for the committee to know what's there.
Yeah, and we always joke about how we don't want to buy half a van, which we have bought halves of vans before, and that's not helpful to anybody. But we always start from a place where you, as the experts, are telling us that what you need to enact the project, and we need to trust that and take that at face value. If we do reduce funding, it's probably because there isn't enough money to go around, and we still think your program is super valuable and we want to support it. So
Exactly.
yeah, so we're always coming from a place that you tell us what you need and we will do our best to meet that.
So we have another question here asking, how should we fill out our financial section if our organization is not required to file a 990? And I'm assuming at that point you probably don't have an audited financial. If you do by chance have an audited financial, that would be what you would do. If you don't have an audited financial or a 990, you must have internal books. And so we would be looking for an approximation of your income statement and your balance sheet produced from your own accounting software. So that's what we would be looking for, is your internally produced financial statements.
But that's a great one to, when you get to that section in the application, to give James a call.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep. All right, we're settling down here on the chat.
Yeah. So we'll hop over to the questions that were submitted. Oh, we got one. Do we match funding?
This is a lively bunch, Sarah. This is a lively bunch here.
Yes. Do we match funding for other grants? I mean, yes. If you know that you have funding secured and show that in your budget and the income, and include in the narrative that, if you get 20,000 from us, you'll get 20,000 from another organization. That's only a positive. That's helping us maximize our investment. We like that. We want to bring, part of our mission is to bring investment into the community, and that doesn't just mean our dollars. So if you can bring external dollars in, that's great.
Definitely a positive.
Well, do we want to hop over to the questions? So feel free to keep sending questions to us. We're just going to answer the ones that were sent in ahead of time and pop back and forth. So what is the CFNIL policy about including salaried staff time in the proposal budget? Please do it. please, please, please do it. If it is, you can tie it directly to the performance or to the project, program, or event. That should absolutely be a line item, 100%. There is no way for you to do your job without paying your people, and you should pay your people. So,
Yeah.
so yes, do it.
Salary is no longer a dirty word.
No, we worked hard to get there. So.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. All right. So people are asking, have asked in the past, are there funds available for neighborhoods or residents in smaller communities? And the answer to that is, in some cases, that could be the community grants program, this program we're talking about, if they are a 501c3 organization for at least a year. However, oftentimes a better opportunity is through our neighborhood grants program that we offer annually in partnership with Home Start, and that is in the spring. And there's a webpage on our website that has all the details and specifications regarding that. But yes, we do offer that.
Okay, if you want to take the next one too, James.
Oh, sure. Are there restrictions regarding grants that would be earmarked for facility purchases? Earmarked for facility purchases. Yeah, that kind of goes back to what I talked about before, where we likely are not going to be able to fund the purchase of an entire facility. So we're probably not going to want to just fund a portion of that facility. So it's kind of like goes back to the half a van. We don't want to fund half a building either, you know. Then you get that interminable argument about which half are you buying. So that's sort of the way we stand on that. Now, however, if it was a piece of equipment of some sort, or if there was, I mean, if the facility was, here's an example, Who Haven wanted to build a dorm basically for their interns that they have helping them with their animal rehab. It just so happens they were providing most of the labor for it. They mostly just needed the cost of materials. We actually were able to give a grant to fully fund that facility. So in that case, sure. But as it relates to a small part of a larger project, you know, there's a spot where we're not probably going to be interested in funding that.
Yeah, or just even able to do it in an effective way. So
right.
Yeah. But that Who Haven application is an example of why providing supporting documents and things like photos are great, because they sent in pictures of the trailer that the kids were living in.
Yeah.
And the entire committee was like, well, we can't let that happen anymore. Oh my God. So all that supporting stuff does help. You always want to make sure that everything that's key, like super important, you don't want anyone to miss. Make sure that is written into the application. Like, don't let your major argument sit in, you know, an attached document. Like, put it in the application itself. But providing supporting things, and especially photos that tell the story, are super important too. So.
And don't assume we know anything.
Yes, assume we've never heard of you before, because it's possible that some of our reviewers haven't. So.
Right.
Yep.
So next one yours, Sarah, I think?
Yes, our nonprofit's eligible to continue receiving grants from the same program year after year. If not, how much of a break is required before consideration again? We used to have a 3-year on, 2-year off policy, where we would fund the same program 3 years in a row, and then you had to take 2 years off before we do it again. We eliminated that a couple years ago because it is asinine. If you are providing a program that is providing benefit to the community and is the best game in town, you are getting the results, why on earth would we stop funding you? Like, why would we handcuff ourselves like that and make you scramble for funding? That's irrational. So we eliminated that. You can apply for funding year after year for the same program. However, you do want to be aware that in those cases, you're not just being judged on your our current application, you're also being judged or evaluated on all of your past performance. So we have those post-grant reports, and we evaluate and share them with our board members and with our committee members. So they are looking not only at the current information you're providing, but they're looking at how you've been doing this, how you've been doing it over time. So there may be a higher bar for you to clear for funding year after year after year. And they will probably ask the question, why are you coming back to us year after year after year? And so be prepared to answer that kind of question in your application as well. But you know, if it's a program that is successful, absolutely come back and ask for additional funding.
Excellent. We've had the question come up, if we have concerns that COVID will keep us from meeting our goal for a proposal for which we are currently funded, can we still apply for a new grant? So there's actually a couple of questions embedded here. One is because of COVID, we haven't been able to complete our grant. Therefore, we couldn't submit our final report. Can we still apply? And the answer is yes. I sort of alluded to that earlier. You can apply if you have an open grant, just need that interim report. That's the important piece there. Then the other question that I see when I look at this question is, I know that there are many organizations that, because of COVID, have not been able to meet the targets that they had originally set for themselves. Perhaps because there's not the access to the number of participants that would have been before. Maybe it's because of social distancing. You've had to cut, you know, the number of folks that you can work with in half, or whatever. There are a number of scenarios that have caused those targets to basically become unattainable. So in those cases, we are providing a lot of leniency as long as you can explain what the situation was that led to it. So this next question, Sarah always has a really good answer for, so I'm handing it off to her.
Okay, well, and I realized that I missed half of my answer last time, so good thing you guys signed up for this one. All right, we've not been selected for a grant multiple times. Is there any advice you can offer knowing it's harder to secure a new grant than a renewed grant? And we have a very robust program, so we want to be sure that we're applying for the right program and focus areas that best fits your grant interest and funding designations. So first assumption that it's harder to secure a new grant than a renewed grant, I would not necessarily say that is correct. We have pretty balanced funding, and like I said before, that with a renewed grant or with a program that's been funded in the past, you are being graded on how you performed in the past as well. So I wouldn't make that assumption. And I also think it's a real strength of our program that we are a good place to go to try new things. We happily support pilot programs. We consider failure absolutely an option. If you try something and it doesn't work, we're like a safe funder for that. We're not gonna ding you in the future because you tried something and it didn't work out. As long as in your reporting you tell us why, what happened, and you know, what you learned and how you might adjust in the future, that's a green in our books. You learned something, it's worth it. That was a good investment for us. So I absolutely would not worry about a new program versus a renewed program. Just what programs are doing good work in the community, that's what we're looking for. But as far as being able to get a grant, I think the first step is to take advantage of all of our resources. Those workshops that we do are hugely helpful, and they're really practical. They are actually, you actually work with your grant application. It's not done theoretically, it's you are working with James on your application in some of the toughest areas. So absolutely take advantage of those. Take advantage of James generally. He's a great resource if we don't want you to struggle. So if you have any problems, please talk to James. You know, he can help you through figuring out the best way to present your application. As far as focus areas go, don't worry about it. The lines between our focus areas are very permeable. So if we get an application and we truly feel that it's going to be more competitive in a different focus area, we're just going to move it. You might apply in human services and get a grant out of youth and families. Fun surprise for you. But that meant that we felt that it was going to have a better chance over there with that committee and with that criteria. So don't be too worried about that. You know, and again, the grant guidelines are very detailed. And so if you're paying attention to that as you're preparing your application, that'll be really helpful. And also do take a look at the size of your request, especially if you're talking about a new program, or especially if you're talking about a new organization that maybe we haven't funded before. Consider the size of the request. So if your organization has an operating budget of $50,000 a year and you ask us for a $50,000 grant, our question is going to be, are you operationally able to handle this investment? You know, so if you start smaller with new programs or new organizations and develop that relationship, get our our committee members comfortable and understanding your work over time, that will be much, I think you'll be more successful. So don't swing for the fences your first time out. Does that make sense to everybody?
It did to me.
Yeah.
See, I told you she gives a great explanation for that question.
But
So
I
then
think
we have the,
give one word of advice. I'm just sitting here chewing in my head. A problem that we typically do see is that sometimes there's pretty large holes in an application because maybe sometimes people assume that we know exactly what they do, or they use a lot of acronyms or things like that.
or jargon.
That our committee knows nothing. And I would encourage anybody that is writing a grant for us to give it to your finance person or give it to somebody that's not familiar with your program to make sure that it's understandable and compelling. That would be my one big encouragement to you all.
That's a great advice.
Yep, our reviewers are typically reading somewhere between 50 and 35 or 15 and 35 applications in 10 days. So don't make them work too hard to get all of the information out of your application. And we also, our application seems kind of chunky. Like we don't ask for one big narrative. We actually chunk it out into more specific questions. The number one piece of advice I always give everyone is just answer the question that's being asked, and that's it in each box. But the reason we do that is so that we can reference back and we can find information quickly because we have such a high volume. So answer the question, and that is it. There are sections where you can talk a little bit more, get a little more flowery, but in those specific questions, just answer those questions. And you only need to provide pieces of information once. You don't have to put the same thing in 10 times. So.
All right, so the last thing really quickly, people ask about final reporting tips. I'm gonna say two things. First, come to the Grantee Orientation if you get a grant. You'll learn all kinds of things about final reporting tips. And number two, treat it as important or more important than completing your application, because you're reporting on the changes that you've made in people's lives, and that's the most important part of the whole process. So I hear that we are getting short on time, so maybe we take any final questions. And of course, if anyone needs to leave, you're certainly welcome to. We don't want to run over time.
Yep, but we're happy to hang out and answer any questions you might have. We really miss getting to just like stand around and chat with people. So. But otherwise, thank you so much for your time and listening to us talk about all of this stuff that we find really fascinating and not everybody does. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time during this process. Application is open now. It's will end on September 21st at 5 p.m. So we hope to hear from you soon.
All right, have a great day, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, yep, and there's our contact info. Please use it.
Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting to switch over.